pretty good, eh?
There you go. So new sports, young athletes doping.
Oh yeah, cool.
Ceremony, no crowds.
Alright, perfect.
That's key things we can cover if we need to.
We're live now, by the way. So
Oh, look at this.
Ah,
We've got beer and cheese coming on the side.
yeah, so help yourselves.
Thank you, Kelly.
Interesting. Go to my link for it. See what comes up. Something went wrong.
That's just going live in 2 minutes 30.
Oh yeah. 4:30.
Yeah.
Maybe we're not live.
Maybe it's
Interesting.
how can you tell if anyone's watching?
How many meetups do you predict New Zealand's going to
Oh!
Not many, eh?
What's our best so far? We should know.
12, isn't it? At LA?
New Zealand's best sport.
Although I think our rowers are going to be amazing.
Well, it's such an unknown. So I watched the rowing today, did you? Yeah, and that's what
Amy
they were.
Trigg was awesome.
Yeah, she's a beast. Real interesting because, like, even the commentator, right? I noticed at one point, and then we should talk about this. He was sitting there and he goes, "All my predictions, I'm getting none of them right." And he was sitting there, and you know, as you do, you know your sport, and he did. He was rattling off stats from, 2020 and 2019, and because that's the last time we saw them.
Yeah, true.
2019, 2012, Olympics 4 years ago, or 5 years ago. And that was what he's going off, and he was going, so none of my, and I was like, well, I'm not surprised, because you haven't seen anyone race for ages.
Yeah, and like,
You don't know what their programs have been up to, you don't really know what's been going on, what they have or haven't been doing.
you just use Lisa Carrington as an example. I mean, she's so much stronger now than she was at the last Olympics.
You
To a degree.
Yeah.
It's like, man, no one knows.
Yeah.
No one knows. And what you said last night about doping, it's like, well, no one knows about that either.
But yeah, so then that can also go into that conversation, right?
We're live.
Are we?
That's interesting.
No, we are live. Thanks, Damo.
Thanks, Damon. We're going to give it another minute, 30 seconds, and then we'll get into it. I wasn't sure if we would be live because this is the first time I've used the software, but there we go.
Technical issues and difficulties.
Yep. Exactly.
Start this recording as well.
Right. Hopefully, if you guys post comments to Facebook or YouTube, it should come up on our screen here, so we should see them come through. But if we don't see them, then it means I haven't set it up properly. But you can still message either Moss or myself, and we'll pick up any comments and questions that you guys send through. So I think we'll make a start. Hopefully, I might just check my own settings and see if we're live. I think we're looking good. All right. So, hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. Short notice, and that's kind of the way we work around here. So Moss came to me a couple of days ago with an idea of just having a chat with the Olympics literally being
on the door.
It's on now.
Yeah.
And obviously Moss's experience with Olympics and Commonwealth Games is as good as anybody. So it's a great opportunity and a real asset to us to actually have Moss be able to talk to us about the stuff that he's experienced with the games and a little bit of what the athletes are going to be finding with these current games. And obviously it's pretty unique because we haven't got the crowds, and it's a year after it was meant to be initially, and all those sorts of things. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Moss has got to say. So thanks for coming along, Moss. As you see, we've got chips and beers, and we've got a dog. So
all out of screen, you can't really see it.
Here's the dog.
Yeah, so no, I guess I reached out to Rob and I just said, because Olympics are exciting, right? You're seeing these athletes, the pinnacle of physical exertion and what they can achieve in any sport, and I love chatting about it and love, as I'm sure most of you in here and how you guys push yourselves when you're doing your own sport, but just seeing what you can achieve, and this is, I guess, the extremes of it. So. It's fascinating, it's interesting, and it's I'm sure everyone will be talking about it over the next couple of weeks. So.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously for those athletes that are in Tokyo now and going through the whole process of preparing for the games, within a couple of the final few days. I know some of them are still going into like a pre-games camp.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking to Moss and I attended a book launch that Drayden Sabinga's put out about athletics in New Zealand, and we were talking to an elite sprinter there, and she was saying that the track and field are just going into a pre-games camp now. So for them to be going into camp when the games are on, it must be quite an unusual experience for them, knowing that there's all this excitement happening, but yet they've still got to focus on the training.
Yeah.
Did you go into a similar situation? Because swimming is a little bit time differently to the athletics.
So the number one thing is, firstly, I think again this is the difference with COVID this year. They're limiting. My understanding is they're limiting the time that you can enter the village to 5 days maximum before your race.
Oh, yeah.
And so obviously, Olympics being 2 weeks, roughly just over 2 weeks long, they obviously have worked out when your first competition is and when you can go. And obviously soccer has already kicked off, so the soccer players, football players were there earlier. But swimmers too swimming is almost always in the first week, so they will be there early. The main thing when you're prepping, so I'm not surprised athletics is the second week, so they'll probably can't enter at this stage. What they do like to do, New Zealand team does like to gather normally, in normal Olympics, they like to get them together. There's like a team celebration that happens, a couple of days before the opening ceremony. They name often the flag bearer, and they, have a big team photo and all those sorts of things happen. But the main one when we're thinking about prep, what we always did is looked at the time of, the local time. So Tokyo's 3 hours behind, but you would try to always be in the exact same time zone as that, but not necessarily in the country. And it also depends on the country you're going into. So, for example, when we went to the Com Games in India in 2010, we didn't want to be in India because we wanted to minimise the risk of getting sick beforehand.
Yeah, that's ironic.
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah. So yeah, and I mean that's sort of global, right? But back then when COVID wasn't around, it was like, actually if you're in that country, you've got a higher risk of getting sick just from poorer quality water and all those sorts of things. And you don't think about things like, it could be, hey, is the lettuce being washed in the tap water, or is the ice, where's that come from? And those sort of things can catch you out, because especially in New Zealand where everything is so, I guess, safe, like in first world country, we don't even really think about it. So I remember for India, we were in Abu Dhabi, so that's where we did our prep, was in Abu Dhabi beforehand, because it was in the same time zone, and it was within, most of the time you want to get sort of 2 to 3 hours flight away from, not more than. So that's usually what we look for. Like the Athens Olympics, we were on a Greek island in Kefalonia, the Greek island, and it was awesome. And so that one I went really early for. I was there 3 weeks before the competition even started, and so that's the normal sort of prep that a lot of athletes and teams will do before they get to the Olympics.
So speaking of time zones, then the interesting thing would be, were you ever competing, or were you racing at times that were really abnormal to what you would have been training at in New Zealand? Like, obviously, because you're racing for the US TV schedules.
Yeah.
Were there any times when you thought about it, you thought, crikey, I'm actually swimming at 2 a.m. compared to what relative to what I would normally be doing?
So I mean, it does. That's why the faster you can adjust to the time zone, the better, though.
Yeah.
So you might have heard that a lot of athletes, they tend to use sleeping pills and things like that, and that's because you arrive in the country, you hit the village or the hotel that you're at, and you just want to get straight away into that time zone. So you use things like sleeping tablets to help to really adapt to that. It is basically it kind of like, what's the most extreme thing I can do to help me get there? And that's the mindset you have when it's your whole life, it's everything that you're doing. Yeah. And in terms of alternating time zones, or different time zones, as some people may or may not know, For Tokyo, they've done the same thing they did at Beijing, where they reversed the heats and the finals, which is what you're talking about. So they sold the rights to the Americans because it's worth a lot of money. So one of the things that I'm very skeptical now of the IOC, and I believe they don't care about the athletes. It's all about making money for them now, and they unfortunately leverage the dreams of all these athletes to do what they want to do. So if you ask any of the athletes, the norm is that we race heats in the morning, finals at night. None of the swimmers at Beijing wanted to reverse it. None of us wanted to do it all, but they did it because of the money that they got from selling the TV rights and for the American public and to fit in with them.
Just like Hunger Games, eh? I mean, you guys are there as the bleachers.
I think these days it's like the modern day gladiators.
Yeah.
When you think about it, none of the spoils, none of the money that gets all these TV rights, I think they get about $4 billion from it.
Yeah.
Not a single dollar gets paid to any of the athletes. We don't see it at all. And so you sit there and you really start to question what is their motivation for doing it, because anyway.
I heard you talking with another foot traffic member, Devon, who's played hockey at the Olympics, and I remember you talking to him about exactly that thing. And it, as a spectator and a fan of the sport, it never really hit me realising that actually the athletes, like you say, it's gladiators, we see it there as entertainment. For you guys, it's actually life as a sport, and you commit so much to it. I mean, we were just talking just before about the form that these athletes were in. The last time they competed was possibly 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And as a competitor going into a games which you haven't really had a chance to do any form funding, you don't really know how your competition are going to be going. And as a spectator, it's quite exciting for us. But as an athlete, that must be one of the most stressful things you can deal with. Like, how do you create a game plan around not knowing who these people are?
Yeah, it's different in terms of, I think each sport is slightly unique. Team sports are probably a little bit more unknown, but more fluid and more dynamic as it happens. And then you go to the sports that are, individual sports, but again, that are, say, played outdoors, which have got, again, the outside environment's going to affect them. The wind comes up, what happens, or the waves, there. And then you go to a sport like swimming, where it's a very controlled environment, controlled, temperature in the air and the pool. You've got lane ropes that keep you in your lane so that people can't slide, you can hardly affect you and things like that. And again, the sport of swimming, which obviously I know, so I'll always reference first, is very, everyone, basically any pool around the world is pretty much very similar nowadays. They talk about fast and slow pools, but modern pools these days, you don't really have to worry about that. And so the times that other people have gone. Although, as we've mentioned, because of COVID, there's been no competitions and people don't know what's happening, and it's really hard to gauge that. At the end of the day, I would always argue that ultimately, though, really you can't really affect what your competition's doing. So your focus has always got to be on yourself. You can races, like we talked earlier about how I purposely qualified on the outside lane sometimes.
We'll go into this a little bit more in a little bit.
But generally you can't really affect, so you just got to focus on yourself and what you need to do. And ultimately when it comes to that's more in the heats, when it comes to the final, so where you're laying it all on the line, you shouldn't be worrying too much about everyone else. You should just be going as quick or as fast or as strong or lifting as high, or jumping as high as you need to. And forget about all the games, and that's how I'd approach it anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. Coming back to the games themselves for these athletes, so I mean these guys don't get the opening ceremony, do they? So taking that away, how much is that going to affect the athlete, or are they there to compete? And the opening ceremony is just opening ceremony.
Yeah, the opening ceremony. One, I don't really think it should be happening but it is the most widely watched event in the world, and again, I think it's happening because it's TV rights and money. That's why the IOC will be pushing for it to happen.
It'll lose that feel though of previous.
Oh, it'll be totally different. Like I was lucky enough to walk. When I say walk, march out in the opening ceremony. At the first Com Games, they put the swimming in the second week, and so I got to march in 2002. And then Athens Olympics, I knew I was going to be coming back to Beijing, so I knew Athens wasn't my peak. And the first day I did have the 400 freestyle, but it was just an event for me to get into it. And I actually just talked with my coach quite a bit, Clive Power at the time, and we decided that we would actually I would get that much energy and buzz from the opening that I would be able to use that the following day in my race. And so I decided to march, and even though I got it home at sort of 1:30 in the morning from that, because people don't realise that they, again, televise it, so they wait till it's the right time. Everybody marches out, but then you've got trying to normally get thousands of athletes into buses back to the village, and by the time they all funnel through and all the rest of it, you don't get home until the village until, normally the big issue is security, right?
Yeah,
it's not COVID, trying to keep COVID sick people out, it's trying to keep, the security is out of the village. I mean, the first Olympics in 2004 was after, obviously, 2001, September 11. And I remember we all got advised to write wills, and I was still a young kid, and I'm sitting, and they're sitting there saying, the Olympics is a serious target for terrorists to potentially to attack it. You should write a will, and I'm going, whoa, I never thought about that, But
can't even spell it.
Yeah. So the opening is going to be very different in the fact there is no crowd. So that initial bit where you walk out through the big tunnel and it just opens up into the stadium. And you hear over the speaker, "Welcome New Zealand," and the crowd roars, and it's just like I get shivers talking about it. And it's just that's all going to be gone.
Yeah.
I've got obviously I know still a lot of people in the team, and I was talking to one of the staff members, and they were saying that they've limited it. I don't know if this is an internal New Zealand rule or for every team, but only 20 people are allowed to march.
Oh, right.
And they said it's the New Zealand process is extremely good in terms of they're not worried about the Kiwis getting, very little in terms of catching COVID or anything like that.
It's I just can't comprehend an athlete going to the Olympic Games. If you're in a sport that's an Olympic sport, that's the peak of that's the pinnacle, and particularly for these people that have just scraped through, and they've probably this might be their first Olympics, so that it might almost be their last chance for the Olympics. Like, for those people, I feel so sorry for them, because they will lose that Olympic experience that you had at Beijing and Athens, and it's like, it must be quite deflating for them, and I suspect when they get through these Olympics, they know that this is their end of their career, and they're unlikely to make, where is the next one? Paris. Unlikely to make the next one. Yeah. For them, mentally, it's going to be extremely tough, isn't it? And I guess that whole post games depression could become a real thing. And I guess we have sport support in, for those athletes, but it's not really until I actually listen to someone like Moss and I think, well, actually, this is a massive deal, and to take that away or to have an altered experience must be quite damaging mentally and quite hard to deal with.
I think at the end of the day, the athletes who are qualified, most of them that are going, well, I always did hear those stories, actually. I was going to say are mentally really strong and tough, and they go in there and they can deal with most of it because they have to. But then you do hear those stories where people's goals were to qualify for the Olympics and go to the Olympics, not to go to compete in the Olympics. So they just wanted to make the team, And so I think that is the difference between those, the top end who are striving to final a medal versus those that will just want to go to compete and say they've been.
It's interesting.
Which is still a massive thing.
Yeah. In fact, it's funny you say that, because I was listening to a podcast yesterday that Sam Bewley was, he hosts, and he was talking about the exact same thing. I mean, Sam won a track gold medal, 4,000 team pursuit, and he was talking about the athletes that are there to win or to medal, and the athletes that are there because it's their experience, and it's to get there, and they know that they're not really going to be that medal chance. And he said it was quite hard to remove yourself and not get caught up in that crowd, or they're going there for the party and the social side of it, but actually go, I need to go, and I'm going to win this medal. And that, and you've been in that experience, you've won the medals, and it must be hard for you to walk into a village and just go, laser focus, I've got to get this job done.
You do notice that, and if I think back to it now, and I'm brutally honest, there is a big difference in the mindset between the athletes, and I always struggle to comprehend, to look at those that they hey, I've made the qualifying time, and then they basically put their feet up and they're off on this trip, and I always sat there, and that really bugged me, if I'm brutally honest, and I just didn't think it was, one, I couldn't believe that they just didn't think, like, I'm going to go there and still try my absolute best, and maybe they were, but they just seem to be talking different and acting different, and and I just felt also it did a bit of a disservice to themselves and to the team, and
Yeah.
if they weren't going there to go, right, I'm going to extract absolutely everything out of myself to go the best that I can. I'm not just going to go along and still turn up. Obviously, they still try hard on the day, but
I don't think it'll happen this year. I don't think that sort of mentality will occur this year, because I think just getting there, we're just so lucky to have games. Because, last year it was taken away, and now it's just like, well, we actually need to get this thing done. It's going to get serious. So there's actually some good questions coming through, so we'll get to these. But let's talk about our swimming chances at these games. I mean, obviously, you know a lot of these athletes really well, and who can you look at and think you've got a great shot for a medal?
Well, we've got a really small team this year. There's only 7, so there's also in the aquatics team is the diver. There's a guy there for diving, so don't forget him. So there's 8 in the aquatics team, 7 swimmers. And Lewis Kleberg is obviously, most people probably heard his name now. He did really well at World Champs. Well, that was a couple of years ago now. And so he's for his main events, the 400 medley, individual medley, or IM as people call it, and so it's again a bit of an unknown. Actually, after that book launch that we had, I went and caught up with a couple of the swimming lads. Like, we hadn't seen each other for a while. We just had dinner together, and we were talking about Lewis's chances, and Dean Kent was there. So Dean Kent, obviously his main event was 400 IM, and he had the record before Lewis broke it. And Lewis has been a 4:09, which is for 4 minutes 9 seconds for the 400, which is very quick. But there's a bunch of guys sitting in there on that 4:09, and then there's one guy who's sort of out front. So we were sort of saying, look, we still think the guy's going to probably take it out, but Lewis is in it with a good chance to pick up a medal, and it's but again, because no one's raced for a while, it's a real unknown. A lot of these athletes, they qualified quite some time ago, and I think then their qualification has just sort of rolled over. So you could get these athletes that, hey, they qualified early, they kept getting stretched out, and they kind of lost focus or lost motivation or whatever, or maybe got injured, and they could be not at their peak. Whereas you could get other athletes who have sat there and trained their ass off, improved and got better, and you just don't know how much better they've improved. Or and we mentioned, I would say too, with the lockdowns and COVID globally around the world, it's locked down everything, including doping, testing systems, and so you get these countries that are known to dope and known to be dodgy and cheat, and who knows what they've been doing. So there's all these factors, these quite big unknown factors of that it makes it so much harder to predict what's going on. I was listening to the rowing commentary today, and the guy there, very knowledgeable, but everything he kept referencing was like, he goes, more than half my predictions are way out the are not right at all. And he goes, and because everything he kept referencing was like 2018 or the last Olympics, or and it was a long time ago, because there hasn't been that racing.
Talking about qualification for events, so obviously swimming is a sport in which you have to qualify to get through to the finals. It's different to other sports where straight finals, but with your qualification process, I was fascinated by a story that Moss told at our Ironman camp, where he spoke to the crowd and went into detail about qualification for Beijing Olympics, and where obviously Moss finished 4th, and probably it's an absolutely incredible race, and like you say, you never know what could have happened. You could have walked away with gold, like it was that sort of race. But you went into that with a specific plan of how to qualify for that race, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, Beijing, firstly, I guess the 4th place I was not happy with. I wanted a medal, and I fully expected that I would get one, for a few reasons. I ended up getting sick and having what Mahi did, and so I had crook guts. And
Mahi belly.
Yeah, and I just didn't want to acknowledge it mentally. I didn't want to acknowledge it because I felt like if I did, I would automatically give myself a way out. So I was sitting there going, yeah, I'm sick, but I don't want to say on that, this is it, my chances are over. So I went all out, and I think that really showed the last 25 metres in that race. I just hit a wall and died, and that's, to me, the biggest frustrating thing for me is that it was a real unknown. Yeah, it was a real unknown of what I potentially could have achieved if I hadn't been sick. And also there was a swimmer in there who did a 4-second PB in the turn flight. And
who was that?
Laszlo Sheikh from Hungary.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So again, a Hungarian swimmer. I think he's at the Olympics again this year.
So was Phelps Leclos?
Chloe wasn't there then, so it was Phelps, there was the Japanese swimmer,
Oh yeah.
Takashi Masuda, and then Laszlo Shea and myself.
And
And I tied with the Chinese swimmer Wu Ping.
That's
so.
right.
But yeah, it was a mess. But anyway, I mean, as I said, I was feeling super confident leading into it. Training had been going really well. I was racing the best I'd ever raced. And so the heat swim, I purposely swam it at a pace to qualify on the outside. Earlier that year at World Champs, I'd won the World Champs, and I did the same thing. I qualified in the outside lane, so 7th place, which can be risky because obviously swimming is eight paces, 8 lanes, and you could miss out. But I have a pretty decent feel for the pace I'm holding and what I need to swim relative to my competition. And so I swam the pace to qualify on the outside lane, and then in the final, this is at World Champs, I knew the Russian guy there and the Polish guy would be watching each other. They qualified the middle lanes, and by the time, and I went out like a cut cat. By the time they saw me, it was too late, and I won the race. And so Beijing, it worked really well, and we thought we'll do the similar thing at Beijing. And so it worked out perfect. I qualified out in the outside lane. And I knew Michael, who qualified lane 4, Michael Phelps was going to struggle to see me. And again, it had given me a chance. Now, I mean, later on, he looks really angry at the end of the race because actually what happened, he dived and his goggles filled up straight away.
Oh, well.
Couldn't really see anything.
Is that right?
So everything was lining up really well for that race, except for the fact I got damn sick, you know. So,
Yeah.
So anyway, I purposely qualified in that outside lane, and again, as part of my race strategy leading up to the final.
That's incredible. I mean, just to go into an event which is such a short duration with a clear strategy, and you know we're predominantly triathletes, so we race for anything from an hour up to 17 hours, and a lot of our athletes, or a lot of athletes in Ironman, won't really go into it with a strategy, but you can just see the importance of having, even for a short race, having this plan. This is how I'm going to do it, and that plan almost paying off. Now, how many people have gone into an Ironman with a very, very loose plan, and it's suddenly something's changed, and you've ended up with an outcome that you can't really be happy about because it wasn't something that you expected to happen. But it's almost that whole thing of if you plan, then there's a bunch of scenarios that can occur, and you know what's happening, and you know what's going to come, and you had that in your mind. So there's a few questions that we'll go to.
Shall we kick the first one off?
Yeah.
Rob's mum is here, and I said to her, "Has she got any questions?" And she said, "What did she say? What about the skateboarding?"
Yeah, Mum doesn't want skateboarding to be at the Olympics, and I mean, I kind of initially I thought, yeah, she's probably got a good point there, but the other thing I thought was, you know, it's an evolving sport, it's an emerging sport, and the Olympics is all about what's bringing popular and what's going to sell to the crowds.
Is it though? See, that's
Well,
where I push back. Now, look, I got nothing against skateboarding, and I think their athleticism and what they can do is incredible. So, like, I think they are absolute athletes, and I think what they're doing is incredible. But at the same time, I would sit there and I would argue the fact that the main reason the IOC has included it is because it is popular, and therefore it's about making money for them, not necessarily honouring the true, you know, values and everything that makes the Olympics, like the original Olympics, the Olympics.
Yeah.
I realise it has to progress and has to move on.
Yeah.
But when they start to include some of these sports where they're on the fringes of, or, you know, and again this brings up the argument of looking at the, soccer and golf. You sit there and you go, these soccer players are under 23, and you go, well, the soccer players don't see it as the biggest competition in the world. The golfers don't see the golfing as a tennis neither.
Even cycling, road cycling, it's not the biggest race in their calendar.
No.
Tour de France is by far.
But cycling's held in higher regard than it is. I mean, George Bennett, right? He's a classic example. He sat the tour out this year to focus the Olympics because he can pick a medal up.
But in a few Olympics ago, it was only open to amateur cyclists.
Right.
So you didn't even get professionals at those races, but now you do.
Yes.
But you know, it doesn't mean for the pro teams there's not a lot on the line for them to be at the Olympics.
No.
For the individual, there is a lot on the line.
Yeah.
So skating. Yeah, I mean, I'm not.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of a scoring system to determine a winner because there is so much
subjective.
There's some subjective bias that comes into it, and I'm sure there are measures to avoid to avoid it being a problem. But I've always looked at it and thought, it's a little bit touch and go. But yeah, I mean, if it was a speed speed skateboarding.
It's different, right? Yeah, it's not as clear cut, and it's and as I said, what they're doing is incredible. And look, I'll tune in to watch it, and I want to see what the guys and girls there are doing, because there's that one really young girl. She's just turned 13. I think the youngest you can be is 13. But I want to tune in. I want to watch it. These guys, they're going to pull off some incredible tricks and amazing feats of athleticism. But at the same time, I still sit there and I go, I'm not really sure it should be a sport. Like the other ones is that speed climbing. Speed climbing. And I saw too they're going to have 3-on-3 basketball, street basketball.
Right? Oh, yeah. Okay.
And it's like, well, yes, they're very popular, and the young crowds are going to want to watch that stuff. I assume that's all the research is showing that's what they want to see. But again, I go, is it really to honour athleticism and what 40th, ultiest? What's that?
Higher, faster, stronger.
Yeah, higher, faster, stronger. Or is it, or are they sitting there and it's more about how much money they're going to make? Yeah.
That's a good argument. Which I wanted to find out your thoughts around the age thing. I mean, when I heard that there was a 13-year-old skater at the Olympics, I thought it's going to be a different experience for her to what someone in their early 30s going on maybe to their second or third games in a completely different sport. What are your thoughts on that? Someone so young being at the Olympics, and where does that lead that person?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that she's going at that age and she can do what she can do. Like I've seen short video clips of her and I'm like, wow. Mentally, I know that because we talked about this last night, touched on it and just in our chat, and I don't know, it's a tough one. They think it is 13 is the youngest because obviously it used to be the gymnasts that used to run into this issue.
Yeah.
And it comes down to a lot of ethics, There's those, you ask someone like Tiger Woods or the Williams sisters, the parents pushed them and they were probably amazing. And I'd say for any athlete that young to be that good, that's probably has happened to them. But at the same time, if you ask them if they wanted to do anything else different, they would say no. But also, how many of these stories do you never hear that go on the wayside where these parents have potentially done that to their kids and they failed, because it's racing. That's, not everyone can be there. So.
Yeah. Well, it takes up the 10,000 hour argument, because I think this person's been alive for 10,000 hours. Yeah. But the other thing is the Tour de France at the moment. I mean, for the last 3 years, the youngest ever Grand Tour winners have won the Tour de France, and there was always this old-fashioned, theory that you had to be developed and you had to be older, and late 20s is when you became Tour de France level cyclist, and now you've got people that are 21, 22 years old winning 3-week Grand Tours, which 4 years ago I would look at and thought there's no way that this person is going to be able to survive 3 weeks, and now they are. So I think it comes back to the skill that these younger athletes acquire at such a young age and develop aerobic fitness and aerobic capacity does help them at such a young age, and it can have that effect.
I think the similar things happen. The opposite, has happened in swimming. Like again, swimming back in. My coach Jan Cameron. It's 64 Tokyo Olympics. She swam for Australia, but she picked up medals there. And I think she was 16, and then when she hit 18, she retired.
Well,
and it was like that blows my mind. Like I was almost 30 when I was still in the teens, And so and then Dara Torres, an American swimmer, she came back for her 5th Olympic Games at 42.
Wow.
So the swimming kind of reversed. It got older, but as you're saying, these other sports, it's showing younger. So I think definitely again people have broken the mold of so-called normal expectations of the age barriers, and it's interesting where the sports are going, right?
Yeah, I think it's amazing when Nick Willis is going to his 5th Olympics, and in the 1500, which is probably the toughest, most competitive track final to make, and Nick's going there, for his 5th time, and I think that's just incredible. And Steve Redgrave, the British rower, I mean he won, was it 5 gold medals? Yeah. So I mean the longevity of these athletes is just incredible. So you look at a 13-year-old and you think, wow, in 5 Olympics time, they're actually not going to be that old. Well, how much longer do these people go for?
Well, it shows that at the end of the day, it's the mindset thing really is really big. Like I think young athletes, they're probably in a little bit of the bliss stage and a bit of an unknown, and they're just like, I'm having fun and I'll get on and I'll do it, and there's not all those so-called normal pressures because they're just not really recognising them because they're younger, they're not aware of them. Whereas at the same time, when you get older, I think you are really aware of that stuff, but you've got to a point where you can actually, you're really smart about how you think, how you leverage things, what you need to do, and therefore how you need to race. And we touched on that, like, because I said, you imagine, you know, athletes, when you're competing against someone else, there is the mind games, there is the psych outs, those sorts of things happen. You know, you see it there, whether it's cricket where they're talking about speeding all the time or anything like that. And I heard stories, you know, the classic one in the swimming pool back in the day used to be, you know, one athlete would comment to another one. You know, we heard these stories from Anthony Moss. A guy said to me, you know, I pissed in your lane in the warm up, you know, and things like that to try to put them off. And you imagine if you were sitting there and you thought, actually, I've got a chance, it's between me and this 13-year-old kid about whether or not I win the gold or the silver. I'm going to say something that's going to throw this kid out because they're 13 and I can take advantage of that, you know. And that would be a real dilemma.
That would be. Oh well. So let's hit a couple of these questions. So we've got a good one here. Actually, this is from Damon, and this is actually something that I was actually thinking of today when I was mowing my lawns. It's a great question. Moss, what would you have changed if you had the chance to go back to the Olympics again in terms of training, nutrition, your competition? That's a good question.
Yeah. One, I think I would have stuck around and gone for another Olympics.
Oh wow!
I would have done different sort of. Well, even when I was really in the thick of things, I would have in the off the back of the major competitions, the so-called off season, I would have done different sorts of training. I would have run and cycled and done those sorts of things. I think that would have, one, for the mental aspect of it, to be able to sort of reinvigorate that, but also just the different types of training. Because I think now, having done multi-sport in a couple of triathlons, I've realised how much fun it can be and the difference in how they complement each other.
Yeah.
And when you're stuck in your sport, like swimming, you know, and I know there's sports like triathlon which cover more bases, but swimming was just like, that's it, that's all I've got to do. And if I break the mould and try something slightly different, I might not get the same benefits I did if I had just swum. Yeah. So it's that risk reward, and always the risk piece was always so big. But I think that's where some more experimentation would have been really good.
That's fascinating, eh? And maybe, I mean, open waters wasn't at the games when you were there, was it?
Just come in.
Oh, right.
Open water swimming. Yeah. So in terms of nutrition, other things like that, I don't know if there would have been that much I would have changed. Like I had it all pretty dialed. You know, I was one of those people that I always said, look, everybody turns up at the pool, you know, or the gym, and they train hard then. But it's all those little, you know, 0.1%, 0.2% that you do at home and outside of the scenes that start to make the difference as well.
Yeah.
And so I used to be methodical. You know, I remember one of the other guys that Andy McMillan, who I raced against in 200 fly and freestyle events, middle distance freestyle, he described me, this is a couple of years ago, but he described me as the Robocop. You know, he's like, oh, you just did your thing, you know, you were just like the Robocop and you get on and do, and I was like, I've always wondered, you know, you wonder how other people saw you when you competed. And
well, I saw that when you were training for the World Masters Games, actually, and that was an insight into the training habits and patterns of an Olympian. It's just, you were like, I got games, I'm going to get this job done. And it was actually funny, you probably don't remember this, but I remember I was coaching that day and you got up in the diving blocks and you said, can you just film me, take a photo of me diving? And I think from what, maybe I'm wrong, but I think you said that it was one of your first dives that you had done for a long, long time. Yeah. And I took this photo and it was an absolutely impeccable dive. It was perfect. And I thought, oh yeah, that's the difference right there. Like, you know, their skill level was so much higher, even though you had that much time out of the sport. You got on the diving blocks, did a perfect dive, swam a 50, and I thought, well, that's actually what it takes to be an Olympian, is that high level of skill and being able to bring it out when you start it up again. That was interesting. Hey, speaking of multi-sport, so I've got a question from Britt Litton around what was your gumboot throwing technique that you, when you won the which was apparently the highlight of your sporting career at the Rangitikei Adventure Race. How did that
go? So we did an adventure race, Britt and myself and two others, and it was the 12-hour one. So, and to be honest, that was a little bit of an unknown. I just wound up and gave it everything.
Did you take a running?
Well, I threw heel first,
and
I luckily my partner Caro, her dad lives down in Taihape, so, and that's obviously the gumboot capital, and that's where the race was. But every time we've been down there, We've
Chuck some gumboots.
yeah, we chucked some gumboots.
Oh, okay.
Just off the main highway, there's a free throwing, and it's got the world record. So if you want a quick 5-minute break from the drive, it's well worth pulling in and hitting some gumboots.
I've done a great bike racing tie, have you? But I've never done a gumboot throw.
There's gumboots there, so you don't need anything. You just turn up and just
Red band?
yeah. There's a bunch of red bands. Yeah. I'm not sure what the official gumboot is. Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so I mean, you've had a great race coast to coast, second in your category, which was amazing. You've done extremely well in triathlon. I've raced against you in a half Ironman, and that was difficult. I've raced against you in a bike race, and you've beaten me there, which was difficult. You're now racing on Zwift, and your brother Cole wants to know, how do you go against your brother Cole on Zwift?
Yep, Cole's got me every single time we have raced, to be fair. So good on him.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I haven't managed to get him yet.
He's on a lot though, eh? Like, he races heaps.
Yeah, Cole and I have chatted because he's been on there and I've asked him his advice and things like that, and he did say he doesn't train. He gets on and he races 3 times a week, and that's all he does for his training. His training is racing, because he said he gets too bored doing the training, so he just wants to race. So
that's what
he
knows
knows it's not his best. If he wanted to do better, he knows some form of training sessions would be better, more beneficial.
Yeah.
But he said, that's just what he likes to do. So good on him.
Ah, that's works.
So he's kicked my butt every time.
So he did have another question, and what was it that gave you that burning ambition to be an Olympian? And because apparently you've had it from a young age, and Cole never did, you said. And is that what's made you an Olympian, or is there something else? Is there natural talent, or is there determination? Or where is that from?
Obviously, I don't know. It's hard to know exactly. I mean, I didn't know Cole didn't have that burning desire. I mean, we never talked about it.
Do you not talk?
But since he's been beating us Swift, we don't talk. No, I don't know. I mean, I kind of just assume that everybody that does sports in the back of their mind would love to go to the Olympics. It's just a commitment thing, really, and what determines people's levels of commitment, I think most of the time, is up here, mental, like, and I know, although I do 100% admit that, I always talk about the mental aspect is the biggest piece, like it's 100% of the equation, because that determines how much of your potential you can access. So potential is, like if you and I want to be basketball players, we're actually not that tall. Like, you've got to be 6.5 or more. Yeah. So we're never going to be great basketball players, and the taller you are, so there's certain aspects, physical aspects, which are going to help determine whether or not you are likely to be better at something, like whether it's sport or music or, these things that you are attributes you do or don't have.
There are some physiological traits that Michael Phelps has, which, and anatomical traits, short legs, long body, long arms, and that's a swimmer.
Yep. And I've got really long arms. I mean, they call that the ape index, so fingertip to fingertip measurements versus your height, and it's supposed to be roughly similar.
Can you pass those chips?
So,
long arms?
there you go.
Jeez.
So, I mean, I've got, I think, a 15 centimetre longer reach than I do my height, which is a lot. And they call it the ape index. Obviously, if your knuckles drag on the ground and you're like a monkey. And but again, that's only indicative of someone's potential, right? So I used to look at kids, because I never had New Zealand age group records. I never had, I never won a lot of nationals age group titles. But I looked at some of my competition and go, man, I would kill for your talent. Imagine what I could do if I had your ability. That's what I used to say to myself. But at the same time, in my head, I knew I was going to beat them, and because I believed in myself. And so that's I think the big thing is, it is a mental thing, really. Again, you see a lot of hugely talented kids, and they never get to their potential. They just don't want to, and there's nothing wrong with that. So it's got to be, I think, first and foremost, it's a mental decision that you've made. What triggers that, I'm not really sure, but you've got to make this mental decision that that's what you want to do, that's what you want to pursue, that's what you want to go after. And then if you do, then obviously you do have your natural potential or limits that you can get to. But at the same time, they can, what are those? I've talked about the real limits and potential of human beings being, you hear those stories where, a mum or a dad has to, a car crashes and the car's lying on top of their kid, and they run over and they lift the car off and drag the kid out. Later on they go, how did you get the kid out? And they go, I don't know, it's superhuman strength in the moment in time, because I had to do it.
Have you read the book as well? Perfected Human Performance?
No.
Oh, you should. It talks about that exact thing, and how a human can pull themselves above a level and do something that seems out of human.
Superhuman, right?
Superhuman.
And same thing, you go to a hypnotist show, anyone who's been to a hypnotist show, and one of the things they often do is they get 2 chairs, they put the heels on one chair and your shoulder blades on the other, and you've got to make a bridge across it. And then most people can do that, they can support themselves, but it's hard. And then they get someone else to go and stand or sit on the middle of them, and of course they collapse because they can't hold it. They hypnotise the person, and then they say, imagine you're as strong as an I-beam and you won't bend. They do the exact same thing. While they're hypnotised, the person stands on them and they don't collapse.
Well,
and so you sit there and go, well, nothing's physically changed in that person. The piece that's changed is all up here. And so what is physically possible? Now you'd sit there and go, well, that person's hypnotised, so they're in this trance. But that's where I would sit there and say, our perception of what we're capable of is just our perceptions, and we're limited by that. And that's all to do with this.
Yeah.
I mean, Roger Bannister is a perfect example. First man to break the 4-minute barrier for the mile. And there's I can't remember his name, a Swedish runner leading up to it. He swore black and blue.
So Percy Sorotti.
So you know the name,
yeah. And the Australian bloke was Percy was the Aussie.
And there was a Finnish
guy? Sorotti was the Scandinavian.
I think
he was Finnish.
And everyone swore black and blue that if anyone's going to break the 4-minute barrier, it was going to be this guy.
Yeah.
And he himself, and my understanding is he ran like 4:01 and point and kept running 4:01s and couldn't do it. And then Roger Bannister, an unknown in some smaller meet, went and ran 3:59. This guy who'd sworn black and blue, and all the commentators again said that if anyone's going to do this, he ran 3:58. Because suddenly,
and he did it about a week later. 2 weeks later.
Yeah, because in his head he was like, "Wow, it is possible. That's like people can do this, and actually I'm better than this guy, so I should be doing it." And suddenly his mentality changed, and then he goes and runs, 2.5, 3 seconds quicker than he'd ever been before, and swore black and blue. It couldn't be done.
Yeah, that's incredible. But, and that's actually quite good because Wayne Ross has asked your thoughts on the breaking of world records in Tokyo. Do you think with the less amount of competition, are people going to be race fit? Are they going to be turning up to that event in world record shape, or and will that not having that crowd prevent that from happening? Now, if we talk about that, the rowing, there were records being broken in the rowing today.
Yeah, there was.
And I don't know if it was might
have been the wind assist.
Environmental, but man, they were ripping along. So, what do you think about the swimming?
And specifically in swimming, I think it would be like any other Olympics. There is a chance. I mean, again, there's a lot of the Olympic trials for the countries have been there has been something that happened. There's been some really quick swims, so I think there's absolutely a chance of it. So I'd say it's not the athletes that are going to break the world records. They're mentally there and they can lift themselves. Whether or not there's a crowd there or not is not going to affect them in that space.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't have affected me. It wouldn't have been anything that even went across my radar. And so I think those athletes will be in a very similar sort of mindset. In terms of competition, I think most of them too, because again, right, you have the ability to think whatever you want to think. So if I was still competing, what I would have thought is, great, I've got another whole year to get faster and prove myself and go a little bit quicker than I was if I was a year ago, because I'd still be improving. Yeah. And so I think absolutely that's how these top athletes that are there, the guys and girls that are going to be breaking them, will be thinking that way. So
I think if we look at triathlon, I think Hayden Wilde's done that exact thing.
Yep.
He's gone, I've got another year, sweet, and I'm going to break some New Zealand track records.
Yep.
I'm going to figure out my swimming, and I'm going to be a better cyclist, and exactly what he's done.
So those athletes that are onto it will do well. Really interesting stat though is that I remember hearing that the PBs, so personal best done at the major competitions, is normally only 10%. So normally at the Olympics being a major comp for that 1 or 2 or 4 years cycle, there's normally only a 10% of athletes actually achieve that. And so it's really low, and because people sit there and they put these, I believe, unfounded pressures on themselves, that they go, this is the big event, therefore there's more pressure. Whereas I always thought, well, it's the big event, therefore I'm going to go quicker.
Yeah.
So I think there still is the same likely chance that records will be broken as before. I don't think we'll see any less. I think if there's more, again, potentially if there's more, it'll be interesting to just look at the countries that are there.
Yeah.
And again, if those countries we think they're clean or not.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I mean, it's sad that you have to look at it that way, but anytime you see a record, the first thing you ask is, what was this? What was
Yeah.
what brought on that record?
Yeah.
So the other question. So in terms of nerves, and how you prepared for the games.
Yep.
And this is a question from Sarah Lloyd.
Do we want to ask that question? Do we want to apply it?
Yeah. How is that going to help you your impending nuptials to your lovely fiancée Carolyn? Because that's a big deal. That's a big competition. You don't want to mess that one up.
I would say in that one I pretty much don't rock the boat and follow the rules, and I think that'll be the best strategy.
Just make sure you're there at the start.
Yeah.
Make sure you're on the starting blocks ready to go.
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's just see if I think there might have been a couple more questions come through, and
Or I've got a couple of questions for you, Rob.
yes, hit me.
In terms of the sports that you're most interested in seeing, which ones are you really looking forward to, like the racing
And the games?
and any particular athletes?
Road cycling,
Yep.
mountain biking, triathlon. So I specifically want to see how George Bennett will go.
Yep.
I think George Bennett is in with a great chance for a medal. I want to see how Paddy Bevan goes in the time trial. I think he's for the last few World Championships he's been top
Paddy's
5.
from where?
Tupper. He's been top 5, and he was 4th place at the last World Champs.
Wow.
In Yorkshire. He's an absolute weapon in time trials, so that's going to be great. Road cycling is going to be fantastic.
We were talking about George Bennett, just to enlighten that, like in the New Zealand team app by it's ANZ, but it's pretty cool looking at it because it gives a few insights. And I was talking about George Bennett and how he built a sauna to condition himself for Tokyo. So the hot, humid conditions, and how he was coming back from training sessions, jumping in it, seemingly with no fluids for an hour, and just sweating and trying to get used to it. And again, that's the extremes athletes will go to prepare themselves. But I didn't realise he sat out the tour to be able to give himself the best chance for the Olympics. So.
I think it's worked perfectly for him, and he's one of the best one-day racers around.
Really?
Yeah, and what he did at the New Zealand Road Champs this year was one of the best races I've watched.
Right.
He won Piedmont, which was just a big one-day race in Italy, and the week later he came second at the Lombardy, which is a monument, and so he's an incredible one-day racer. So on that course, he might get gapped in that last climb, but it's enough after it that he can actually pull himself back in.
Because you shared the course profile, and the last climb goes up, then there's a little bit of a cone, like a volcano shape, and then a little climb, but then a downhill with a bit of a flat for first, right?
And I think that really suits
you might
his
make
skill.
up grounds over those.
Yeah, and he's a great descender, so I think that'll really work into his favour. Mountain biking is going to be great. I want to see how Matthew Van der Poel goes. I want to see how Tom Pidcock goes. Van der Poel obviously did the first week at the Tour de France and held the other jersey. Won a stage.
Did he not go past the first week?
No. Which is probably the best thing, because it would have allowed him to recover and then train specifically for the... Because the mountain biking is so different to Grand Tour riding that if he finished a Grand Tour, he would have been out of condition for the mountain bike race, which is all about short duration power, massive high punch, whereas Grand Tour riding is more about sustained long duration power. So Van der Poel is going to be incredible. He's one of the best bike riders in the world, but
I had no idea of that.
Yeah, it was interesting. Wout van Aert's going to be amazing on the road and in the time trial, but Felipe Ganna's going to be probably the favourite. He's the big Italian, 6'4" Italian time trialist specialist, which is just
the beast.
Absolute beast. He's amazing. The women's mountain biking is going to be great because the World Cup races have been really, really, really good. There's a young French rider, Leona Lecomte, and she's been winning World Cup mountain bike races by minutes over the reigning world champion and previous Olympic champion.
And she's quite young?
Yep.
Again, one of these young
21,
athletes.
22 years old, yeah. So that's going to be great. Tom Pidcock, he's probably one of the most versatile bike riders as well, like Van der Poel, so it's going to be good to watch. And then triathlon, I'm really looking forward to seeing how Hayden goes. I really want to see Hayden do well.
Yep.
It's going to be hard because he hasn't had enough competition to really know he's going to be up there. But I think...
So that comment I'm hearing from you, you're saying he's got the ability to take it out, or at least to be right up there,
Be right there, yeah.
But you're just saying if he had done more competitions to help his mental aspect get there.
Yeah.
So if he can get his head right, and realise that he is capable, you think absolutely that's the factor.
And he's a fearless guy. Like he's another one of these young athletes that just is like, I just want to go out because I love it and I want to win it.
Yeah, go out hard and come home harder.
A few things have to happen. He needs to have an amazing swim and be on the bike with the front, because he's one of the best bike riders in the sport. And if he can hit that run ahead of with enough time on Alex Yee, and Alex Yee to have been split and be back in the field, then I think that's probably going to be a great chance. But I think Tyler Misselchuck, who's the Canadian guy, I think he's a real dark horse.
Misselchuck.
Yeah. So he won the test event. He's a really, really good runner, and he just sort of works away in the background. And I've always looked and thought, man, that guy's actually got some real talent. Women's, I think Nicola Spurg is going to be so good. It's her third Olympics. I think she's going to medal again in her third Olympics.
Yep.
But Flora Duffy, if Nicola Spurg and Duffy get together on the bike and right away, then I think it'll be
game over.
Yeah, it'll be like Gwen Jorgensen and Nicola Spurg at Rio. And then if we hit the track, 5,000, 10,000, I always love watching that. Steeples I enjoy watching. And then marathon, it's going to be fascinating, men's and women's marathons. And then in the swimming, I really want to see the open water swim. I think that'll be great.
Yep.
Kayaking, looking forward to seeing how Lisa Carrington goes. I think she's just an incredible athlete, and I don't think we know how good she actually is, because we haven't seen her compete for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think she'll be a standout performer for the games.
I mean, we know we've got a few contacts into the kayaking a little bit through there, and apparently those girls all of them have been hitting personal bests in terms of in the gym and speed and things like that, and so it'll be awesome to see what they can do.
Yeah, and they're real.
And the other boats, outside of it, obviously Lisa's dragged the women's kayaking sport up with them. Those girls are now there, and they, I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do as well.
Yeah, and then I think I really enjoy just watching sports that I've never really watched for 4 years, like fencing.
Yep.
Or get into that when it's on. Man, why do I not watch more fencing? I just enjoy watching just some of those stories, the boxers and the wrestlers and some of those amazing athletes that we never see until every 4 years it comes around.
And it's a bit of a pity, really, the fact that the Olympic athletes don't get more coverage more often, because it is incredible seeing them, and that's where it's dominated by cricket, rugby, and those sports, netball that have seasons, and I think triathlon's better for that because they do have more regular races and racing seasons. So I hope these other things like the International Swimming League and all those sorts of things, they start to take off and get more popular. Yeah, definitely. I think if we haven't got any more questions, we'll wrap this up, because I think this has been an hour and it's gone really, really well. There's been a lot of good. We got 3 likes. It's gone real well.
That's awesome. One's probably my mum. No, she can't work out Facebook. She hasn't been able to watch this. But thanks so much, Ross. I actually think if you've got time, I wouldn't mind jumping on in a couple weeks or in a week's time, maybe doing a mid games chat, and then after.
Maybe we'll do it when the games are going on. We can watch a couple of the key races or one something that's real highlight.
In the background, we might have some copyright rights issues there.
Potentially,
But if you have any questions, just post anything, and maybe we'll bring them up in the next chat we have. But enjoy the games, and thanks so much.
Choice, thanks for having me.
All right, see you later. See ya.